Hello everyone, my name is Paramveer Singh. I am working as a professional teaching fellow in the School of Computer Science at the University of Auckland. I am also representing the Computer Education and Learning Technology Research Group in the School of Computer Science. And it is an honor to be presenting our paper titled Digging into Computer Science Students Learning Journals in this Koli calling edition. So we thank the program committee and the organizing committee for giving us this opportunity. So on behalf of my co-authors, Evan, Andrew, and Chujiang, I thank you all. So this work is about our ongoing project on analyzing students' learning journals. The underlying motive is to first understand how our students are currently executing note taking and journal writing during the proceedings of our computer science undergraduate courses, and then taking that knowledge on to investigate what can be done to improve their note taking and journal maintaining strategies that can have a positive effect on their learning of the overall course contents. We see journals as not only a technical support for students' learning, but it can be useful tools for enhancing their soft skills, for example, their planning and self-regulation skills, improving their overall organization of their learning, and in the process, kind of meta-analyzing their own learning processes. Hence, analyzing them can provide us with important leads into how they can help our unanimous cause of succeeding our students. Right. So this is what I'm going to talk about in the next 12 odd minutes, and then we can have our discussion. So basically, I'm going to talk through what we have achieved thus far, because this is a kind of a preliminary work before leading into discussion over whether what we are doing makes sense. So we treat the term journal, that is learning journal, as a compilation of notes taken during any kind of learning session, whether it is a course, a seminar, or say a session like this. These notes could be written by hand or typed on a device, and hence the journals could be hard or soft bound. We have seen from our experience that students record mainly two kinds of information there: content specific technical details, or a reflective kind of self-regulatory notes on how they can improve their learning ways or learning methods, etc. So our long-term goal for this project has been to improve students' learning during their undergraduate programs through the introduction of effective note-taking. Now, defining what is effective note-taking is central to this goal, and hence we decided to divide this work into short-term goals. First of which is to analyze how uh, they are currently taking notes and maintaining their journals. Or if I try to pose this in the form of a question, what attributes can be extracted from students' handwritten learning journals? So before we move further on, let me quickly go through the existing research in this area. The research on analyzing students' journals and in particular looking into their relationship with students' performance is quite vast and old. We could trace it back to 1920s, so it's kind of a century-old work. In modern times, that is during the last 2 decades, most research has revolved around investigating the impact of note taking on students' performance, mostly in psychological, other social or health sciences, and literacy related educational fields. Many of the recent research focuses on the differences in the effects that handwritten and typed notes have on students' performance. Uh, in computer science higher education, most research is focused on the use of reflective journals. We also identified many attributes or features of notes from these papers. We will later know that these attributes are important for this work. Next is the study design and the context of this study. So the the subjects are computer science students, which are studying which studied the CompSci 280 Introduction to Software Development course. This is a stage 2 course with an enrollment of around 240 students. So last year it was 240 students. So this course was offered to these many students in semester 2 of 2019. Mode of note taking was handwritten. So they were asked to take notes by hand and then compile those notes in the form of hardbound journals. These can be notebooks, or they were also free to combine or compile their notes using spiral binding or other kinds of bindings. There were some exceptions for students with disabilities. They were allowed to take type notes. They were also given journal construction guidelines, which were very high level guidelines on note taking and journal writing or compiling. Um, so that set the tone for how should they be going to um, start writing their notes and then compiling them in the form of journals throughout the course. Okay, next is the method. So we used a mixed method approach. That is, our approach involved both qualitative as well as quantitative forms of analysis. The data collection and analysis methods used were mainly inductive coding based grounded theory method. So we um, primarily had to extract uh, different, so we had to extract the notes from the journals, and then we had to code them using the inductive coding, code the various attributes that we identified. Then on the data that we extracted about those attributes, then we applied the statistical methods. And this was the phi coefficient correlation, so simplest of correlation methods, just to investigate the relationships between various journal attributes. For the data collection, out of the 240 journals, 184 was the final count that we ended up with. In fact, we didn't get the 240 journals. Only 189 students, or 189, we received 189 journals, out of which there were some journals which didn't have content on the lecture that was targeted for this specific extraction iteration. So for lecture 2, because we for this specific first study, we targeted lecture 2 that was based on software development processes. So the journals that didn't contain notes on this specific lecture were omitted. There were in total 12 attributes that we went after. These attributes were extracted on the basis of authors going through uh, different parts of the notes and looking at different facets of the notes and then coming up with the attributes and the sub attributes. So this is the list of all those 12 attributes. So I will not go through each one of them, but from the names, from their names, it is quite clear about their what would they possibly mean. So, for example, verbatim means that whether the notes are mainly verbatim, how much coverage do they provide for the lecture content topics? Are there any interpretations, some notes representing interpretations in place of verbatim note taking? Are there references to internal or external sources? When I say internal, that means referring to some content relating to the course itself. External would mean some kind of, say, for example, a web page or a website. Worked examples, any self-reflection or planning, highlighting, visual representation, which will include different kinds of diagrams and also little visual representation symbols like arrows or different shapes drawn to represent a few things. Mostly the visual representations were in the form of, were used to represent connections between different parts of the notes. Whether they used multiple languages in their notes or not. And one common language found was Chinese or Mandarin. Um, listed items, different kinds of patterns were observed for the listed items as well, or outlining. Abbreviations, students rarely used abbreviations, but yes, this is one of the attributes over writing. And if we look at the sub attributes in the form of a mind tree, we went on to distinguish between among these 12 attributes by looking at their sub attributes. So for example, highlighting was further split into 6 subcategories. And similarly, planning was distributed into further 4 categories. Time doesn't allow me to go through all these categories, but all these were drawn out while carefully looking at uh, the data extraction, um, looking at the notes during data extraction. Okay, so these are some of the examples that show screenshots of the student notes. These also show various subcategories, instances, or impressions of subcategories of the attributes that we picked. Onto the results. So in contrast to what we expected to happen, verbatim was the most common attribute, and most of the notes were quite verbatim, which could be because of many reasons. One of the reasons could be that the journals were an assessed component. So students might have taken the notes just before the assessment. Um, then we also see that there was a lot of highlighting, which is also quite expected. So they use different kinds of highlighting methods like underlining or boxing, wrapping, text wrapping, background coloring, and so on, which seems to be drawn from their school time habits. Listed items, so students prefer to list using hyphens or bullets or many other kinds of um, methods. There were considerable number of interpretations, impressions for interpretations, but there were other attributes which were rarely used. For example, references, and I would not talk in detail about multilingual because this will depend upon whether your first language is English or not. So that attribute might not be that effective, but attributes like overwriting, when we are writing by hand and we are using less amount of overwriting, it kind of reflects on whether it is expected. It might be because of more verbatim kind of notes. So there can be a correlation, right? So for the highlighting, underlining was found to be the most common sub-attribute or highlighting style. 52%. So what is not shown here is the coverage attribute, but because it had three values, so we decided not to show it here. But 52% of the journals were found to have high coverage, whereas the others had low or moderate coverage. We went on to find the phi coefficient correlation, Pearson correlation. And what we found was that although overall we got very low correlation values, um, but the values that fall in the higher bracket are all related to the attributes that work opposite to verbatim attribute. And then we can say that the low amount of correlation also can indicate about the uniqueness of each attribute, but this is still early days, uh, and it is difficult to fully enforce that finding. So the preliminary findings of this work are that we were able to identify 12 unique attributes of content of computer science learning journals and notes. Students mostly write verbatim notes with little self-reflection. So most of the notes were verbatim, but then the reasons behind this trend could be several. Students do use a variety of highlighting and content listing methods, which could have been drawn from their school time habits. Statistical method of correlation analysis finds very little correlation among the attributes, which again could be because of their unique nature or because of the small data set for now. So we look forward to extend this study to the other lecture notes. We conclude that the attribute data representing very limited course contents might be the reason. So hence we plan to extend this to not only the next lectures, but also to the other courses. Right. So at this point, I would open the stage for discussions. So overall, as I mentioned, this work is the first stage of a larger project where we ultimately want to enhance the note-taking abilities of our students, um, and also establish the relation between the way they take notes and their performance. I will let you ask any questions and comments and suggestions. All in this room are welcome to come up and get the discussion going from here on. Thank you.